Well, I think like one of the hardest things that I've had to go through is grieving this while also trying to be a mom. Like, I feel like I can't just break down and cry and spend days in my room because I have 2 little kids who rely on me for everything. And so there were a lot of days where I'm like so thankful that I had my parents, because there are days where I just laid there and cried. And I couldn't even bear the thought of like getting up to even have a shower. Like, it was just so devastating and heartbreaking that you're like, how am I going to get through this?
Welcome to What Matters Most. I'm Drew.
And I'm Jen.
And today in studio, we have Haley McLean with us.
Hi.
Hi.
Haley is somebody that I've known as she grew up from church and that kind of thing. And so I've seen you like grow up, and then you got married. And we're here to kind of talk about your story. You've been through just a very recent separation and divorce. Mm-hmm. And so that's kind of what we're going to talk about, your experiences with that, and kind of give us an opportunity to have a conversation around sort of the ways that we can work through challenges and,
make the most of what life gives us. Right? Exactly. Yeah.
So I think we'll give you an opportunity, like you were telling us a little bit of your story. Some of it I didn't know. I remember when you got married. You got married actually in the pandemic, which was kind of like interesting, right? Because I do remember it was like one of my first experiences Zoom, and I kind of like attended your wedding, but I didn't know how to turn the audio on, so I only saw it. I didn't actually hear it. But anyways, it was kind of like, this is an interesting time. And that was my perspective of yours.
Yeah.
That's all of it. But yeah, so.
I met him at school, actually. We were in the same like apartment complex. And I actually saw him playing basketball out like with his friends. And I had my roommate write my name and number on a Rice Krispie square. And I had her go run out and I said, go give it to the blonde guy so he can call me. And he like looked up at me and he like waved and just kept playing basketball. And I really didn't think like anything would come of it. But he texted me like the next day, and we didn't stop texting for the next 6 months when we got married. Wow. Yeah.
That's awesome. So 6 months, hey? From time you met into time.
Yeah.
Yeah, how was that, the dating process? Did you feel like, things went really quickly?
Well, growing up like religious and having like that background, I knew it was quite common for people to get married quickly and to get married young. And so it wasn't abnormal that was something that I was experiencing.
Yeah.
But it was probably quicker than I would like my daughters to ever do now, like looking back, because I didn't really have enough time to get to know him, to really see all sides of him. And I didn't really know myself either. I didn't know like what I wanted, what I needed, what I was okay and not okay with. Right. And so it was really quick. And looking back, I probably should have dated longer and asked harder questions, but I didn't really know like what questions to ask. I didn't really have much dating experience. So I was kind of clueless like in that department. I just thought he was really cute and I wanted a husband, and that worked. So yeah.
Yeah, like you're preaching to the choir here, I think talking before the camera started rolling, I think there was a lot of commonalities between our experiences. You don't think, or you don't even kind of register how big red flags are that you see. You're just in it, and you're trying to make the best decision with the knowledge that you have, because you don't have a lot of knowledge. I didn't have a lot of life experience. So
you're also blinded by, like, when you're young, you're blinded by love.
Yep.
Or what you may think, like.
Yeah, or the dream, the
Yeah.
living the dream. Like with mine, it was like, oh, he's got a good head on his shoulders, you know. And for me, that was a huge thing. I wanted somebody who knew where they were going in life, but there was other things, right?
Yeah.
So, do you want to talk a little bit about the red flags that you experienced?
Yeah.
Yeah.
So while dating, he told me that like he had problems with like pornography and like masturbation. And I was like, oh, once he gets married, those issues will go away. You know, it's because he's single and doesn't have an outlet that he struggles with those things. And so that was like a big red flag. And we also had nothing in common. Like my idea of what a good time was and his idea of a good time were not the same. So like other than our physical attraction and our religion, we really had nothing in common.
Yeah.
But I just always thought that like, oh, because we're the same religion, it will be okay. Like it'll work out.
Yeah.
We like each other enough to make it work, but I think mutual attraction is not enough. Obviously not to make it work. So like there was just a lot of things where I knew that I wanted somebody who was more like me, but I knew that this wasn't right for me, but I felt like this was good enough. You know, I felt like this will be okay.
Yeah. So back when we were talking the first time, you mentioned, which I totally understand. You said you felt trapped. How can you elaborate a little bit on that?
Yeah. So he had proposed to me, and we had multiple fights already, like before we were even engaged. And then I got engaged and we were still like arguing. And I was like, I don't think, like, I know it's common to not always see eye to eye, but like to be fighting this much before you're even married, I was like, I don't know, like if this is normal. But you know, we had already sent out wedding invitations. We had already taken engagement pictures and like posted about it. And I was like, the embarrassment of like calling off an engagement was far greater than like my fear of going into this, like the unknown and the uncertainty. So I was more willing to go through with something that I felt like I shouldn't do because I was more scared of like the shame and the guilt that I would feel if I, you know, pulled back.
Yeah. Yeah, isn't that interesting? Now you look at it and it's so clear.
Yeah.
But at the time you're like, those were real feelings.
Which is really also sad because it's like nobody, I don't think, would have even blinked an eye, you know? Like nobody would have judged me for that, you know? But you put so much pressure on yourself thinking that everybody's watching you and that like you have to go through with these things, and it's like really in reality you need to take care of yourself more than pleasing other people.
I love that. I love that. I wish I would have told myself that. You know, but the only thing we can do is learn from our experiences. And you know that like you're never going to make those kind of decisions again because of what you've experienced. So you went through the marriage, and how did it go?
So night 2, I told him that I wished I never had married him. There was so much pressure with being intimate, knowing that his struggles that he had, and him making comments like, this isn't how I envisioned it to be, like this isn't what a honeymoon's supposed to look like. You know, I felt a lot of pressure to do what he wanted me to do, and, you know, being somebody who had zero experience in that area, like I was like, okay, like we tried, like let's go on a walk or like let's go do something, but that was not enough for him, and he made me feel bad for not, you know, wanting to just lay in bed all day. And so like honestly from our honeymoon and then on for the next 4 years, it was just constant fighting. Like from the beginning, trust was broken and it was never repaired from that point on.
So when you say trust was broken from the beginning, is that what you're talking about? Like you feeling pressured and not being able to trust him?
Yeah, like my emotional trust was
totally
like broken.
Yeah.
Because I didn't feel safe, like
totally
being super vulnerable with him, I felt like I had to be guarded and I couldn't like be vulnerable with him.
Yeah, it sounds like there's that level of like when you start a marriage, yeah, you need that like to be able to be
that connection,
intimate, and connect.
Yeah.
Not just on the physical level.
Yeah.
But be able to be emotionally like, you know, it's just there's just that opportunity to like just, you know, like get to know each other, have fun, like be. But,
be vulnerable with each other.
Yeah.
You know, I think the sad thing about like the way the world views sexuality, it puts this pressure on, you know, like it's hard when if you could just remove that and not worry about, you know, like that what you see online or what that, because it really does have it, because what you see online removes that intimate level, that removes that spiritual level
and spiritual,
that connection. And so like to try to bring that into, well, this is how it should be, that's really hard.
It cheapens it.
Yeah.
Right.
Well, and also what was really frustrating for me was like we did not have sex before marriage, and yet we could have fun together. We, you know, enjoyed each other's company. And so now all of a sudden, because we could have sex, that was kind of like all that he wanted, and like nothing else mattered anymore. Like if I couldn't perform in that way, he didn't want anything to do with me, which was like frustrating because I'm like, why did things change all of a sudden, you know?
Totally.
So that was like a big blind side and broke my trust again, where it's like I'm only good for one thing, you know, if I'm not giving you that thing, you don't even acknowledge that I'm here.
Yeah. So how do you think you handled that through the hard, did you go through a depression at all?
I was super lonely and super depressed because I lived in Utah, and like all my friends and family were not in Utah. So I was super isolated, and it was a long 4 years of just fighting and feeling lonely and emotional abuse and physical abuse, and it was just really, really awful. So it was rough.
So when do you think was the turning point when you felt like enough is enough? Because that sounds awful, what you went through. It's awful. And I know a lot of people go into marriage thinking, I'm making a commitment, and you know, even if I'm not happy, this is a vow, this is like a commitment that I've made. I need to stick it out and see it through. When did you realize that, you know, this can't go on?
So if I'm being honest, I probably never would have left. I felt like I had made this commitment, and once again, the shame of calling off, like getting a divorce was a lot. So I probably never would have left. So in a way, I should be thanking him because he allowed me to be free.
Yeah.
Because I would have never had the courage to do that.
Yeah.
Because I had 2 little kids and I had no job experience and I was alone in a foreign country. I felt like I had no support.
Right.
And so I would have just withered away and just lived my life like that.
I understand.
Right. So I guess you'll have to explain to the audience how that happened, like because you mentioned he's the one that kind of asked for it, but like so how did it lead from that? You said you were married like 4 years. How did it lead to this point where he
to him
asked
saying
for
that?
it?
Yeah.
So it was a long 4 years of, like I said, fighting. So he had a porn addiction and a video game addiction. I would ask him to spend time with me. I would say, let's go on a date, let's watch a movie together. And he'd say, no, 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 like constantly just no. He'd say, I'd made plans with my friends are more important than you. Like, so he would, he'd put his friends above me constantly. And so that was just like hard emotionally, but I just took it. And then I found out he'd been talking to this other person our whole marriage, and I just took it and I let it slide. And then when I came to visit my family, like I said, he just texted me saying that he was over it and he wanted to pursue somebody else. And
the person he was talking to.
yeah.
How did you take that?
It was rough, and I cried for many weeks. I felt like, what could I have done differently? What should I have done? Like, thinking back of all the things, like, full of regret, like, oh, I should have just given in to what he wanted. I shouldn't have complained so much. I should have, like, you start putting a lot of, like, pressure on yourself and a lot of guilt on yourself. But then, thankfully, I have good friends and a great family, especially my mom, who was like, you were miserable the whole time. Like, this isn't a you problem. This is a him problem.
Sometimes when you feel like the door is closed or closed on you because somebody made that decision, it's actually the door is opened.
Yeah.
So do you feel that way now?
Totally. Yeah. Because, I mean, this might sound rude, but he was kind of dead weight. Like, he was an absent dad. He was mean and he was hurtful and he just wouldn't acknowledge me or his kids. And so it was not a good place for me or my kids to be. And so it's like, now that I'm freed from that, I get the chance to show my kids what a healthy relationship looks like. I get the chance to show them that they're worth more. And I think especially as a mom and as a woman to two girls, I feel a lot of responsibility to teach them that, like, they deserve more than that, you know? And it was like, I wouldn't want my kids in that situation. Why do I want that for myself?
Totally. Absolutely. So my next question would be, like, you know, this is what matters most. And so whenever I think, even in the last episodes, I love to talk about what matters most to me, and children in divorce are what matters most to me. How are your kids doing?
They're good. They're still really little, almost 1 and almost 3. And so they're taking it the best that they know how to and know how to handle it. Both of our children were happy surprises. So neither of them were, like, planned. I didn't try to, like, have kids to save my marriage or anything.
Yeah.
But I am so thankful that I have them, because I think that they are, like, the good that came out of this situation. And I'm actually happy that I have 2, because I'm happy that they have each other and that they can kind of support each other through this. And they don't have to feel like they're alone, you know?
Totally. That's awesome. And they are young. We kind of talked about that before, that they are young. So there is blessings in that situation, that they're so young when this happened, rather than having to, like, you know, be used to, you know, living as a family and living under yelling or them witnessing him treating you like that. There's less trauma that way for them. And this is kind of their new normal. And so this is what they'll remember. So that's almost a good thing. I have a friend who said it's better to come from a broken home than be in a broken home. And that was when I first became single mom, because I thought it was the end of the world for my kids. And he just looked at me and he said, it's better to, because he was from a broken home. And he said, it's better to come from a broken home than be in one. And that just gave me hope, because it, you know, divorce doesn't have to define you as when you're a kid or when you are the one being, you know, going through the divorce. That doesn't have to define you, but it can give you the experience you need to make better decisions. What are your plans now that you're here in Canada?
Yeah, so I'm still trying to figure that out. I feel like this all happened for a reason, and I'm trying to find what that reason is. I felt like maybe I should move back to Utah. You know, they say it's best if kids have a relationship with both parents, and so I was seriously contemplating that. But then going to Utah, he barely made an effort while I was there, and I don't feel like I want to uproot my life again and their lives again. For somebody who doesn't really show up for them. So I think
what my plan is right now is to go back to school, I think. While my kids are still little and I have the privilege of being at home with them, I would like to do some sort of online schooling to get a master's degree so that I can work once they go to school.
Yeah. So when you were in school and you met your husband, what were you taking?
So I was doing a bachelor's in sociology.
Oh, wow.
I had my degree in that.
That's awesome. It's so important to have something to fall back on.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, I think like that's one of the big reasons why I didn't leave is because I couldn't support myself on my own.
Yeah.
And I was willing to stay with him because I knew he was financial stability and I knew that he could take care of me and my kids. So now it's like, now that I don't have that, a big goal of mine is to be financially independent so I don't fall back on that again. I don't want to repeat that. So that's something that I'm aware of that I do. And so it's like, I need to face that.
Yeah. That's awesome. Your kids are lucky to have you.
I'm lucky to have them.
Yeah.
They're so fun.
Yeah. That's awesome.
So I have a question. I'm going to take us back to in your marriage.
Yes.
Because, you know what, like, and I sense that you struggled. You had a lot of rough times, but I sense that you had a lot of grace. You were giving him, you know, a lot of like benefit of the doubt, a lot of like, okay, well, hopefully he'll change, or I'll give him this, and you know, like. But you mentioned a break of trust, you know, and so I guess my question is to more in that, like, how did you allow yourself to give him the grace that you needed to be able to keep going with marriage and to, like, you know, from, like, I guess at least put in your, you know, your part, you know, like.
So I think a lot of it came from me not wanting to admit that I had made such a bad choice. I didn't want to be like, I chose so poorly. So I was willing to, like, we tried therapy. I tried individual therapy. I tried all these other things to try to make this work. And something that I realized is that I can only make it work so much if he wants to make it work. And there was no effort coming from him on his side. There was no trying to do it to make changes. I was willing to, you know, get on anti-anxiety medication. I was willing to go to counseling. I was willing to get my hormones checked. I was willing to do all these things because I wanted this to work so badly. And I was willing to do whatever it took to keep my marriage together. And so I think the turning point for me was he constantly blamed me, said everything that happened was my fault. And so I was like, I can only do so much. And if he's not willing to make any changes, then nothing is going to change. You know?
That's correct. When I say that's correct, that was a out loud thinking, because I think I had to realize that as well. Like, you know, marriage will only get through the hard times when both people are invested to get through the hard times. And so when you realize that, that's like, oh, wow, like, it doesn't matter how hard I try. It doesn't matter, and it won't matter if the other person just doesn't want to be in it or doesn't want to make the changes.
And I think, like, what happened with us is that, like I said, on day one, like, feelings were hurt and trust was broken. And I don't think he was ever willing to forgive me from that. Like, because I was inexperienced and I was like, I didn't know. And so, you know, I might have said I said on the first day of marriage, like, I wish we didn't get married. And like, that was probably hurtful for him. You know, I can see that I could have chosen some words differently. And so, but he was never willing to, like, move past that and, you know, be like, let's start from a clean slate. I think he always held a grudge against me. And so no matter what I did from that point on, I don't think he was ever going to forgive me and move on. Whereas I was totally open and willing to be like, look, we had a rough start, but, like, let's work on this because we have kids together and, you know, we loved each other at one point. Like, let's really put in effort. But I think he was just so stuck on those words that I said, like, I never should have married you. And he just couldn't move past that.
You know, sometimes we all say things that, you know, because these, you know, when you're with your significant other, your spouse, you're being vulnerable. And when that trust hurts, sometimes there's things that you wish you wouldn't have said. But yeah, so I understand that. Like, I understand where you're coming from. Like, I see. But I also, yeah, you're right. Like, he needed to move past that. Like, I think that's what marriage is all about. Like, we say things, not like anything like that, but like, even in a normal marriage, there's things that are said or whatever when things get hard, but you have to forgive and move forward. Like,
yeah, and it's communicating. And it's recognizing, like with you, if you love the other person enough, you're like, okay, well, I love you, so I want to understand where you're coming from, or how that hurt you, or whatever. Like, there's, because there's things that we've developed, and a lot of it's because we have baggage.
We do.
And it's like, but ours is extra because we're both coming from past relationships, and so then we, sometimes we expect
I think it's better now, but I know what you're saying. In the beginning,
we would expect, unfortunately, that the other would just react the same way that that
previous
we had experienced it, or previous, and then it's just like, well, no, I'm like, remind you, like, we have to remind you, you're not that, like, I'm not that person. That's not how I am, right? And we're not our past, right? We can become something else, and we can
together.
Make changes, and we can own the mistakes that we make, and come together and forgive and move forward, like, big or small, right? And so, yeah. What I wanted to say is, like, what I find interesting is, I think you two are connecting in a way because of your relationships and the way that they panned out, being that it was kind of rough altogether. And in my case, I feel like I had a good marriage that degraded over time. And so, and I don't know which is worse, because one is, it's just a normal and you're always in it, but another, you have something good that degrades and there's more to grieve over. I think, like, that's at least my perspective as I'm seeing it, and I feel like also when things do come to a head, like in my case, it's just devastation, and it becomes like it was just my world caved in, and I think you're describing depression. I know you went through it too, and it's like, and yeah, that's where you need that support.
Yeah,
because like I had it just crashed. It's like dark. You're like, honestly, like I like some, going through that, I couldn't even function. I'm, like, you're just like, how is this my reality right now? Like, you're just,
I can see what you're saying.
I just remember one moment I was just like trying, let me do a self-checkout, and I'm like, why am I doing this? I like actually picked up my groceries, and I'm like, I'm going through the till because I can't do this myself right now.
Yeah.
I was just like, I'm like not okay, and it's just like, like, or just things that you just, normally can just do. It's just like, you're just, it's just hard to like.
Well, I think like one of the hardest things that I've had to go through is grieving this while also trying to be a mom. Like, I feel like I can't just break down and cry and spend days in my room because I have two little kids who rely on me for everything. And so there were a lot of days where I'm like so thankful that I had my parents, because there are days where I just laid there and cried. Like, I couldn't even bear the thought of like getting up to even have a shower. Like, it was just so devastating and heartbreaking that you're like, how am I going to get through this? And there was a long time, even up till just like a few weeks ago, where I was like, how am I ever going to feel normal? Like, how I do not see a bright side to this at all. Like, I do not see in 1 year how I'm going to feel better. Like, I feel like I will feel this for eternity. It is so heavy and so hard, but it's like so cliche, but time just heals everything, it doesn't maybe like fix everything, but you can move on. You can, you know, like you can face the day, and time makes things easier.
So I understand that. Like, I remember one night I'd put the kids to bed because I didn't have my parents with me, but I put the kids to bed and I would just have like ice cream as a little treat, you know, after, because being a mom is hard and doing it single and going through a divorce is hard. And I remember just crying, like, you know, you think you don't have any tears left. And then just going, God, like, it feels like I will never be normal again. This emotional hurt physically is painful. That's how bad it was for me, which I understand. Like, I'm sure it was the same for you and you, because when you've given yourself and been married to somebody, shared so many things with somebody, it physically hurts being ripped apart from them, even though you know that this is probably for the best.
Yeah.
That's hard. I've never experienced that. And when you said time, I would say yes, but in some ways, like if I look back on it, the pain is still there.
Yeah.
Would you say the same?
Yeah. Like, I mean, it's like it's numbed a little bit. Like it's
Totally.
less,
You
like,
don't know, you don't focus on it.
Yeah.
Because I'm happy now, but it's still there when I think about it.
Yeah.
Because I don't think that ever leaves you. Just, yeah.
Well, especially like you have kids with this person and like you had a life with this person. And
Yeah.
I think more so it's like what, like in my case, it was like the dream and what I, like my hopes for what could have been
Yeah.
are more, because like I don't want him. Like everything he is, I do not want that in my life.
Yeah.
But what could have been, I think is what is
Totally.
what I'm grieving and what I feel like I lost.
Yeah.
So it's like an imaginary, like, or like a, like,
Yeah.
Just your dream. Your dream.
You know.
Like, I coming from a girl perspective, maybe I'm like being like stereotypical, but I feel like girls naturally have this feeling of like what they want with their life, how they imagine it. And not to say like guys don't, but you know, it's the fairy tale kind of thing. You just want to have a good marriage. You want to be a mom. Not all girls feel that way, but like for me and for lots of my friends, like when we were like young and single and we were like, yes, like happily ever after.
Yeah. Well, and I think like I've talked to a few like divorced people and some of them are like, I would never get married again because like I was scarred and I have too much trauma and like I don't want to go through that again. But for me, like I loved being married. Like I love the idea of like having somebody who's your partner and who you can work towards goals with and who you can trust and who, you know, you can go at the end of the day and just talk. Like I love that idea of having somebody like that, but I just hated who I was married to.
Yeah.
So like this experience hasn't like totally cut me off from like the idea of being married again. Like that's something that like I want even more now because I saw that it's real. And I saw that, and I've seen in my life examples of people who have that, and like I want that, but it just didn't work out with this person.
Yeah.
But I want that still like in my life. So I think that's like, I'm super grateful that this hasn't traumatized me enough to like not want to seek after that again.
I'm glad too. Like I said, I just look at you and I'm like, holy cow, from all the things that you've experienced, you are so strong. You are. And I know you probably hate me complimenting you, or maybe you don't see it, but I see myself when I went through what you went through. Not that we had the exact same experiences at all, but we had the commonality of being divorced and single with 2 kids. And I was not in the same place you are. And then maybe that's just because we had different experiences and we're different people, but I admire your strength. Yeah. And that will take you many great places.
That's a really good attitude. I mean, because like I think like from our experience, we've come together, and I feel like we both are better Like, and this is our story as we knew each other when we were young and single, and we actually went on a date.
When I was 19.
It didn't pan out.
Yep.
But then 20 years later, we met up again, and we've talked about it lots. That wasn't supposed to be. Like, we weren't, we weren't the same people that we are now.
No.
And we're better for it. I mean, sadly, it's like, but that's just like, we can actually embrace those trials that we come through because it actually makes us better for that. Like,
oh, absolutely.
For that person. Like now we're so much more understanding, and like,
I think we communicate way better.
Yeah, because we recognize what we have to do, like what's important in a marriage, what we want, like a little bit more, right?
Yeah.
And just like when we were young and
naive, totally, and inexperienced. I think that's, you mentioned like back when we were talking about communicating, how you're like, oh, I'm sorry that made you feel that way or whatever. I experienced that last night when we were having a discussion. He goes, oh, I can see it from your point of view. I'm like, I've been married to him for 5 years, and he is just like, I can see it from your point of view. I'm like, you are so like wonderful, wonderful to communicate with, because I didn't always have that, and it's amazing that life can bring you to those places where you will find the person that's right for you. Yeah. And I know you will. Yeah, I know you will, because you're determined. I know it just by listening to you. And that's good, because I think it's really good to know what you want and what you don't want, and know the red flags, right?
Yeah. Well, like how I said earlier, like I didn't really know myself like when I got married, and I probably wouldn't fully know myself if I hadn't gone through this experience, because now I know like what it is and it isn't that I need in somebody. And so like I think while this experience has really sucked and I'm still kind of healing and trying to overcome it, I can see that like I'm doing the work on myself that needed to be done that I probably wouldn't have done if I hadn't gone through this experience.
Totally. It's awesome. I love the attitude. Last episode we were talking about how we get over hard experiences, and one of the big things is gratitude. Gratitude even in the darkest and hardest times. That's the thing. If you focus on those things, you will be able to see the other side. And it's so much better on the other side, because it's hard getting through when you don't know how it's going to turn out.
Yeah. And kind of going like along with the whole gratitude thing, like I'm still quite angry like through this whole thing. Like I haven't fully like forgiven and moved on completely. I'm working on it, but I'm still like things are still quite raw. Like it's less than 6 months. And so I'm still trying to figure that out and, navigate my anger towards him. And so for a long time, I was really angry that like now I'm stuck with 2 kids. I had that mindset, like he's ruined my life. I'm going to be a single mom. He gets to go off and be with this girl. He doesn't have that, like, I'm a single dad looming over him, because the kids are not around. He gets to go and basically be a free single guy with no consequences. And I was really angry with that. I was like, my life has been ruined, and now I have to have this single mom label forever. But I've recently tried to switch that to like, well, how grateful am I that I get to have my kids? And how grateful am I that they're safe, and I know that they're safe, and that I'm safe, and I get to teach them how I want to teach them, and I don't have to be afraid of teaching them what I want to teach them, and I can be an example to them. And so just trying to switch my mindset of that whole gratitude thing, like you were saying, has really helped, I think, help me find peace and to just, try to be okay.
I love that. I love that. Because it could be easily, we were just talking about that yesterday, like you could easily be jealous. You could easily be angry, and you know what? It's okay to be angry when you've had those things happen to you. And you'll have to allow yourself to get through it. But having the paradigm shift in your mindset is essential to getting through and creating opportunities. Like, I get to raise my daughters. I get to be that example of you will be, because that's your mindset. And they are so lucky to have you, to have a mom who has that mindset that is able to switch, is able to have those trials and be able to thrive in those trials. I think that's amazing. Yeah. They're going to be strong girls.
I hope so.
Yeah.
So, Haley, what has mattered most to you during this whole experience and trial?
I think having a strong support system and knowing that I'm not alone has been really important to me. And that has been what has mattered most, whether it's with my girls, whether it's with family, my relationship with God. Just knowing that I'm not alone through this has been the game changer, I think, for me.
Awesome. Yeah.
And I want to touch on, like, because we're coming close to the end of this, but I've noticed, because I have you on Instagram and I follow you, I've noticed that, like, you're not afraid to share the ups and the downs, and like you just like you just do fun things like dyeing your hair or whatever, like just like other things, but you're also just like, here's the real, and you're just like, I'm crying or whatever, like you're having a bad day, and like, so I guess my question is, like, how do you just like be vulnerable to the world like that and like be willing to share all of that?
I think for me, a lot of like my fear of calling off an engagement or getting a divorce was because it wasn't commonplace. People share the best of the best on social media. And so I was scared to be vulnerable and admit that I had made a bad choice because everybody's life seems perfect. And so I feel like now that I'm in this position, and there might be somebody out there who's going through the same thing and, is afraid of shame or guilt or embarrassment. And so I don't want people to have to endure what I endured because they don't see that it happens.
Yeah.
And that it's okay.
It's okay.
That they're alone. They don't have to feel that way because I'm there going through it with them. So
yeah, you're not alone.
Yeah.
That's awesome. That's another reason why we started this podcast. We just decided we have things we want to share or conversations that we want to have that we can all be kind of like edified a little bit.
And look at the positives, like through the hard, because we need each other. We need each other's experiences. We need each other's what we've learned, and what you're doing right now will help somebody watching.
But it's been awesome because like I've had people reach out to me and tell me that, oh, like I'm going through the same thing, and I would have never guessed because they wouldn't have shared it, or so it's been really good to reach out and like make those connections. And I've even had people reach out and be like, I would have never guessed because a month ago you guys were all in Italy together having a great time, and like I would have never guessed. And I'm like, well, that's the beauty of social media, is that you can kind of hide that, so I think it's been important for me to share, like you said, the ups and the downs and just the reality of life.
Yep. I love it.
Yeah. Well, thank you so much for coming and sharing all of that.
Thanks for having me. It was fun.
So if people, do you want to follow you? Because I think they should. On Instagram, probably on Facebook too.
Yeah.
Like, what's your handle or like your...
So you can follow me on @Haley_Grace.
Awesome. Thanks so much for coming on.
Yeah, thank you so much. I appreciate it. It was fun.
All right.
Yep.
Thanks.
Thanks.
It's been a good episode. See you on the next one.